Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and I have Pamela Gupta here, and this is our monthly webisode of the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Fix. Hello, Pamela.
Hello, Debbie.
So lovely to see you today. I'm always happy to chat with you, just in general, but it's always fun to chat with you about certain cybersecurity issues that are happening in the world. So, what would you like to talk about today?
Thought we'll talk about Amazon's delivery drivers having to sign a biometric consent this week, which I
Yeah.
think is unprecedented and is kind of has some repercussions for privacy and security, and definitely would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, I'll just explain at a high level and then we can get into the nitty gritty of the details. So, Amazon released some information, or some information was released. The Amazon is going to have their drivers, I think these are their contractors, if I'm not mistaken, submit to biometric tracking while they're working. So, that would be, obviously they already probably track things like GPS, but being able to track kind of someone's face, whether they're tired, things that go around, go happen sort of in the truck or outside of, the delivery vehicle. And this has raised a lot of concerns about, not only for civil libertarians, but people just about an employment employer relationship, and how much information that companies can track about individuals and what they can do to individuals as a result of that. So yeah, it's been a pretty hot topic, I think, on LinkedIn and other places, because people are concerned about having biometric tracking creep into the workplace in ways that they may think may not be necessary. So, what is your thought?
I mean, just to give a little bit more context to it, add to what you said, we are talking about a lot of drivers. We're talking about at least around 75,000. Amazon, as we know, is quickly becoming one of the largest employers globally, right? It's probably the third, I think, after Walmart and I don't know, some other company, but I think they're the third largest employer in the country, in the world, actually. And when it comes to this using AI powered cameras to be installed in the trucks that, in the delivery trucks that these drivers have to give consent to being installed, it has some implications that go beyond what we are used to in the corporate world, where, you really don't have any um, rights to privacy as a corporate, even as a corporate employee, right? We had to be give consent to company to monitor any digital exchange, for example, online emails. There may be cameras in the workplace. So we are already used to this kind of surveillance when it comes to a company having the rights to do that for an employee. But this is slightly different just because this is biometric data. They are actually have AI powered cameras that will be installed in the trucks or in the vehicle. And what they are asking, what Amazon is asking their drivers to do is to agree to facial recognition and biometric data collection within the trucks they drive. The intent, let me just talk a little bit about the intent. The intent is not for surveillance per se, right? They want to leverage this technology to for safety purposes, they're saying, right? That if a driver is tired or if there is some security issue, by security, I mean safety issue as they are driving. So this will give them a very, very complete view of their surroundings as they are driving for their better safety. But because of that biometric element, that's where the complexity comes in. And their terms are take it or leave it, right? Either you sign this consent or we don't want you on the job. So that's what makes it a little bit different from what we're used to.
Yeah. I think, a lot of people are definitely up in arms about this. And as you say, surveillance, and whether you call it that or not, is not new in the workplace. But I agree that the biometric element makes it different. One thing that is different, even though it's not against the law, so it's the state of Illinois, we have a Biometric Information Privacy Act, which is the currently the most stringent biometric law in the world right now. So it has a private right of action. It has very high fines per incident or per biometric capture. That's how it's being interpreted. So, like every time that some person's biometric can be captured, if a company has done it in a wrong way, they can be liable for a lot of money. But really, all that law says is if you collect someone's biometric, you have to let them know before you collect it, what you're collecting it for, how long you intend to keep it, and sort of what is the purpose. And this law is very different where employees in other employees in other states in the U.S. may not have those types of rights, but this particular law doesn't carve out employees. So an employee also has that right to challenge companies if they do that. So from a legal perspective, it really isn't. It's not against the law, obviously, to do this as long as they give those notices, and they don't necessarily need consent as an employee, as an employer, but they do need to let them know how they're going to use the data. And then probably there's going to be a lot more scrutiny for companies to try to do this as well, so that they regulators make sure they are like keeping the data as long as they say they're going to keep it. Also, there's a heightened risk about data breaches as it relates to biometric data. People are concerned about the security of this data and how it can be used. And then another thing is, how does that data follow the person in the future? So let's say you yawn or something, and they say, well, you can't work because you're sleepy, and maybe you're not sleepy, you're just yawning because you're bored or something. I don't know. What if that information carries over into other employment? So maybe they say you're a lazy person or
Right.
something. It's just very interesting to see, how AI is categorizing people and what is the downstream effect of that sort of categorization in the future.
I do want to talk about the data protection. So, but before we go, before I talk more about that, because there are the obvious ones that we're talking about right now, but there's also Amazon is a large company, and there are different types of data they are collecting, and we want to take a look at that definitely. But just to kind of to conclude the thought on what biometric data collection, how is it different, and what are the implications of that, which are different from the regular surveillance that we already kind of seem to have accepted in the corporate world or in the working world. Um, the fact that they are there is no defined regulation, right? We can perhaps rely on regulation to make sure that there was a letter that four senators have written to Amazon, for example, asking that how are you planning to use this data, and so they have. I think our Connecticut Rachel Blumenthal is one of the AGs or senators who has requested some more insight from Amazon as to what they are planning to do with this data. So regulations can play a role in, making sure that at least that, you're not giving the whole farm away, right? You're letting them have some data, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a really risky proposition. And so some checks and balances around what is the usage of the data, what can it be used for. And I think in general, from what I have seen of AI regulations and AI data understanding by the regulators, not seeing a very informed approach as to really fully grasp the repercussions of what is the data and how it can actually be used or misused when it comes to the AI aspect. So I won't go into that right now because that's, I think, is a very large area. We can talk about that another time about AI regulations and, the preparedness of U.S. regulators to really be informed in how to impose the right regulations, which doesn't kill innovation but doesn't expose us to risk. Okay.
Yeah. And one thing I want to clarify is that, as far as I can see, this is being rolled out to Amazon contractors. So they aren't really employees, which means that they have a lesser right than an employee would have, right?
Okay.
But there is, I don't see a lot of pushback, or I don't see any regulation that will stop them from doing that to an employee. But obviously, as a contractor, you know, because that employment relationship is very different than an employee. I can see why they took this step to see if they can, work this in, and possibly it will may end up to be something that will be implemented with employees, but not just Amazon. But I think if you see a company as big as Amazon being able to do this successfully, I can definitely see other companies try to do this as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot of the trucking companies, for example, they are already deploying cameras for security purposes, for safety purposes, for tracking where is the truck stopping, what is the state of the, of the driver, etc. So it's already being done. And I think you know more about this on the legal side, Debbie. But as far as whether it's an employee or a contractor, I don't think the onus is any less on the employee, on the from the company side, right? From Amazon side, on how to what they can do with that data, right? Just because it's a contractor doesn't mean that there's less responsibility around what they can get away with. That's the way I see it. Okay, but I stand corrected in terms of the fact that it's not the employees, but it's the contractors, here
Hmm.
in question. So one of
Yeah.
the things that we had talked about, the other side of the aspect is when it is biometric data, a compromise of this data has obviously a much larger repercussion, a much larger implication, because this is you're not going to get another face. It's going to be very difficult to right the wrong. It's not a credit card that you can get another credit card, for example, if a credit card gets breached. Which brings me to another point, right? Because Amazon is such a large company, and if we look at it, it has three different areas of its presence, right? Very large presence in e-commerce, very large presence as in what we're talking about technology for their e-commerce fulfillment, um, and there's also the voice activated systems that they have, the Alexas of the world. Okay. So they are truly a behemoth when it comes to the kind of data, kind of very sensitive data that they are collecting and the size of that data. So, in order for a company to have the right kind of data classification and sensitivity associated with the data that they're collecting, and then to protect it adequately is going to be a much bigger challenge than for a company, for example, which only has a presence in, let's say, voice activated technology. Okay. So
Yeah.
another, right? So that's another area of complexity that comes in when we're talking about Amazon.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There, yeah, the problem is with all the AI and all this stuff, there just aren't enough regulations around it. So obviously, there are things about breach and what companies need to do if they breach information or they have a breach. So the notification or whatever the fines are per state and stuff like that. But there really aren't regulations around companies that are able to compile so many different types of data on individuals. I mean, almost to have practically a 360-degree view of an individual based on all these different facets of their business and how customers or how people interact with their company. That's just still like an open question legally, and especially if, let's say, you know, uh, a lot of these tech companies are starting to go into medical and finance stuff. So really, kind of, customer behavior, how people behave or how they, do things in their
Right.
home with surveillance systems, their finances and health. There really is nothing else. So that is, a very complete picture of individuals. So if you have companies that are compiling this type of data in some way, the risk become even higher, especially in a breach situation where someone could literally impersonate someone. So the problem with that is there's very little recourse or redress that an individual can have. Even if, let's say, even if you were able to file a suit or go to court, that doesn't, you can't you know, unbreach yourself. You can't, once that biometric information is out or that sensitive information is out, it's out. So you can't pull it back in. So it just brings up a lot of legal challenges. Obviously, it heightens uh, the onus on the company to protect that data because it is so sensitive. But I don't see a currently. I don't see a good balance check. I don't see a good check for that, or a balance or a counterpoint to that that would sort of protect individuals unless they protect themselves.
Right. So if we take a look at some of the data that Amazon is collecting, right, it's going to be on just on the e-commerce side alone, is going to
Hmm.
be a very could be very sensitive data, right? Your order history, payment information, what they're collecting through their third parties, right, for advertising, for example, and the identification, the authentication information, etc. That's just simple, on the marketplace. Then we go to the Alexas of the world, where they're getting not only voice information or information that because it's always on, the information that they may be collecting actively and also passively, meaning if it's just monitoring data and it's sending it, which, by the way, can be looked at internally or it can be looked at by third parties who are processing the data for them. But now there is a third. Uh, okay, third. Let's talk about what we have been talking about, which is the driver information and the biometric data, for example. But let me throw out one more, which is also unique to a company such as Amazon because of their different kind of things they're doing, which would be the Alexas of the world, because the Alexa is not only collecting data for what Alexa is given, but it is actually can be a gateway to other systems as well, including,
Hmm.
for example, for scheduling. So now there it has a hook into other forms of systems. I read in one time there was a talk about using it to start the car, for example, a electronic car, electric car, sorry. So now you're talking about interfaces between Alexa or Echo and other ecosystems. So this can become very problematic if we are not baking in the right controls, the security controls and privacy controls in a context driven manner. So I would challenge that there isn't a regulation that should be carved out for by industry, because if you take this company as an example, it is into a lot of different things that is not a cookie cutter approach, right? All companies actually are very unique. So I think that taking a one size fits all regulation and a one size fits all law is not going to protect you and me as customers and the broader society and broader business either, because this is not something that can be rolled out once and going to cover up all the risks. So I would think that the best way to really prevent any repercussions is to take a risk-based approach, which is context-driven. And I think that is where I see this holding some water in terms of accountability, in terms of security, in terms of privacy to be effective.
Yeah. I don't. I think in order to weave all this together, you need to have the individual to have a human right. So, right now, privacy outside of kind of unreasonable search and seizure in the Fourth Amendment is a consumer right. So, your rights to privacy exist in the context of commerce. So, if you're not buying or trading or selling something, then those rights don't even kick in. What if you don't want to buy or trade or sell? Then those right you don't have the same type of rights. So to me, it needs to be more centered on the individual and what can we establish as our own rights, and then have the laws sort of built around that. So that way we can get out of this whole sector specific thing, because as you say, a lot of these companies can go into many different sectors,
Right.
probably any sector you could possibly think of, and just having a different regulation per sector is really very old fashioned thinking, because
Mhm.
any company can go, people were surprised when Amazon bought Whole Foods, where I wasn't surprised about that. So, they can buy whatever they want. They can go in any industry that they want. So if we're not, thinking broader about regulations and protecting the rights of individuals, then we'll always have kind of these gaps and loopholes that we're not
Right.
anticipating.
Right. I think that is true, and I think in addition to customers or clients holding their own, or individuals, let's just say, because they can be employees, they can be contractors, they can be customers, right? Whoever, across the board, if we have, if our data is our own, that's definitely a big step. And also, across the board, though, there are some systemic and broader controls that will be pertinent depending on the context, depending on what they're doing. And there really cannot be a one size fits all kind of a expectation of this, oh, because then there are too many loopholes introduced. So if, but you just have to have data protection, for example, that doesn't mean anything by itself,
Right. Yeah.
right? It has to be, for example, for this voice activated data, for the Alexa data, and the fact that Alexa is now interacting with my computer so I can get the scheduling information. Now that's not even protecting my data anymore. Now it's protecting the system to system interface. So we really have to have a very context driven approach to what is the risk your company introduces, what is the area it's playing in, and show me how are you taking the right risk mitigation measures, right? That's what I would like to see in a regulation, not a regulation that says, because I'm not seeing a lot of informed decisions or informed regulations coming out where they can really stay in touch or lockstep with technology. And I don't blame them because technology is emerging at a very fast pace. However, I wouldn't make excuses for them either, because you really cannot be talking to a Facebook CEO and talking about Google accountability. So regulators really need to be a little bit more step up their game to understand where where are the risks coming from, and really take a look at it, step back and look at it without any other issues clouding the outlook, right? Just look
Yeah.
from a risk-based perspective.
I agree with that. That's a great thing to do. Right. Look at the risks, not look at the type, not look at the segment, or the sector of things. Look at the risks that you have, not only as a business, but also the risk to humans or individuals. So yeah. Excellent, excellent. Well, this is a good topic, Pamela. Thank you for bringing this up. So I'm excited to talk with you next month to see what interesting things we have to talk about.
Looking forward to it, Debbie.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, thank you.